Well, hello there, dear folks and fellow YouTubers. I hope you are doing fine on this fine day of September 11th, 2021. And as you can tell by both the thumbnail and as well as the description of this video, this is neither an ambient video nor a gaming video, but rather it talks about my thoughts on the 9/11 terrorist attacks a full 20 years later. My goodness gracious, can you believe it's been that long since those horrible and tragic terrorist attacks happened? And in this video, I want to describe not only my thoughts on that event, but also my experience of those events, as I was a meager young man of 14 years old at the time that happened. Because, yeah, that was 20 years ago, and I'm 34 years old now. But anyhow, I absolutely hated that event. I do not want to see something like that ever happen again. And the weird thing was I had no relatives, no loved ones killed in those terrorist attacks, but it gratefully affected me. And in fact, it made me a more cynical and pessimistic teenager, I think, as a result because of it. And again, that's coming from someone who had no loved ones, no relatives killed in those attacks. But then again, I think it kind of affected all of us in some way or another, because that was very formative of my teenage years, at least the rest of my teenage years, that is. And I'm even planning on making some ghost story possibly influenced by my experience of those terrorist attacks. I won't say what the story idea is, only because I don't want to risk my idea getting stolen. But yeah, so now I'm going to go ahead and describe what I was doing on that morning. So I was just getting out of bed for the day like I usually would, back up at my old large house up in Salem, Oregon, where me and my family were living at the time. And what happened was I was just getting out of my bed in what was then my room back then, and then I remember just walking down the stairs, walking through the living room, and then I walk into the kitchen of what was me and my family's old home back then up in Salem, Oregon, as I now live in Ashland, Oregon, at the southern tip of Oregon. But anyhow, and I remember seeing on what was then my mom's small white television, basically, and my first initial thought, before I even knew what the heck happened, was, oh my gosh, I hope the World Trade Center towers hadn't collapsed. And then I asked my mom two different times what had happened in New York City, and I remember her distinctly saying, two planes had hit the World Trade Center towers, and the World Trade Center towers totally collapsed. Let me say that again. Two planes had hit the World Trade Center towers, and the World Trade Center towers totally collapsed. And I remember her saying that, crossing her arms exactly like that. I just totally remembered her doing that. And it was from that moment on, my perception of New York City had changed. At least for a while it did. Anyway, because I remembered how much I loved seeing shots of the Twin Towers in the movies before the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And it was, of course, such a traumatic event for a lot of people, including myself, that they censored it out from certain movies because it would create such horrible and painful associations for people. And yeah, definitely, that was definitely my experience of those terrorist attacks. Awful, awful events. I do not want to see something like that happen again. As a friend of my Uncle Steve, Willie Mercer would say, I do not want to see something like that happen again. And I couldn't agree more with him if I tried, yeah. And I went through a bit of actually depressive phase as a result of those terrorist attacks. Again, this is from someone who had not one loved one or relative killed in those terrorist attacks. But yeah, it caused me not to be as happy of human being for the rest of my teenage years, and it would take until well into my early 20s, age-wise, to finally get past the trauma of that event and those feelings of bitterness that, in fact, resulted from it. So yeah, definitely. And so yeah, luckily, I'm a way happy person than I was all the way back then. That is completely different. I'm a completely different human being from what I was back then, because I'm more happy, joyous, and positive, optimistic human being. And one of the things that made that event so sad was, as as a website or two described, the optimism of the 90s died that day. And that's partly why I did not enjoy living through the naughty oddies. Not that I wasn't grateful for it, but it was like suddenly being back to the more colder, more cynical, pessimistic side of the 70s. I actually love the 70s. I just don't like that colder, darker, more cynical side of it, but the more colorful, flashy, garish side of it. And the reason I mention that is because the naughty oddies is definitely a throwback to the 70s. Not so much the colorful, retro, sleazy 70s, but the, again, more kind of dark, bleak, pessimistic 70s, if you will. And yes, I really hated those events, and it traumatized me and saddened me for a number of years afterwards, and I hope we don't. Yep, and, well, I believe that's all that needs to be said of this video, folks. And remember, if you like this video, please hit that like button below. And if you want to see more of my videos, please hit that subscribe button below. And I shall see you all when I see you all in one of today's other videos, folks. Before I quickly end this video, though, I just want to say I've got 2 video game related videos coming out today. One which is part 2 of my Star Wars Shadows of the Empire walkthrough, and the other is an ambient video of Doom 3. You'll see what it is, of course, what specific area of what level that'll be an ambient video for in that video, of course. But, well, I hope you all have an excellent and wonderful 20th anniversary of 9/11, folks, and I shall see you all when I see you all in the next video, folks. Until then, though, my name is Nuclear Scotty 7. Goodbye for now, and have an excellent rest of your day. Amen.